I set the groceries down on the scorching concrete, sweat stinging my eyes as the lock clicked shut. From inside, my son's voice slurred through the doorframe. "Beg me back in, old woman." Beginning, after carrying him through sickness, after decades of holding this family together, I was shut out of the very house I built. But that night, I made a vow. If he thought locks could break me, he would learn just how many I could change. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The jewelry box sat open on Eleanor Hart's nightstand, its velvet lining catching the pale morning light. Her fingers reached instinctively for the diamond ring she had worn for 50 years, the ring her late husband had slipped on her finger in a small chapel outside Reno. Her hand closed on emptiness, her eyes widened. She pushed aside the pearl earrings, the silver brooch, the string of imitation pearls Monica once mocked. The space where the diamond ring belonged was hollow. She looked toward the bedroom door. It hung slightly ajar, though she was certain she had latched it before bed. A cold draft seeped into her chest. Ellie dressed with mechanical precision, her movements deliberate, her mind already sharpening. In the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee greeted her. Brian sat at the table, shoulders hunched, shoveling eggs into his mouth without meeting her eyes. Monica leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, her nails clicking faintly against the screen. Neither looked at her when she entered. She poured herself coffee, the silence louder than any argument. Steam curled around her face, but the bitterness in the air had nothing to do with the brew. Her son's eyes darted toward her briefly, then away. Monica smirked at something on her phone, but didn't share. Sophie slipped into the kitchen, her steps careful, her 16-year-old face tight with unease. She slid into the chair beside Ellie and leaned close, her voice a fragile whisper. "Grandma, they took it." Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't demand details, didn't ask which it. She already knew. Her hand covered Sophie's gently, the girl's palm clammy. Ellie's face hardened, not anger, not yet, but a steel-cold resolve. The scrape of a chair broke the moment. Brian rose, dumping his plate into the sink, muttering, "I've got things to do." He grabbed his keys, avoiding her gaze as he left. Monica followed, her perfume cloying in the air, muttering, "Don't wait up." The door slammed, rattling the frame. The kitchen fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sophie's shoulders slumped. "I saw him take it when you were sleeping. He told Mom it was just a ring, but I know." Her voice cracked. It wasn't just a ring. Ellie stroked the girl's hair once, then withdrew her hand. "I know what it was," she said, her voice even, steady. Later, at Trudy Meyer's house, poker chips still scattered across the dining table from last night's game, Ellie relayed the theft in clipped sentences. Trudy, her silver hair pulled back tight, listened with the focus of a paralegal who had seen too many families turn vicious. "You write it down," Trudy said firmly, passing Ellie a yellow legal pad. "Every detail. First theft leads to the last. You'll want a record." Ellie took the pen. Her handwriting, still sharp, carved across the page. "Diamond ring, taken while I slept. Brian sold it. Monica knew." She underlined the word "sold" until the paper nearly tore. Trudy studied her, eyes narrowed. "You're not crying. That's good. Don't waste tears. Save your strength. I already buried the man who gave it to me," Ellie said, setting the pen down. "This is just glass now, but they'll learn what it means to steal from me." The desert sun sank lower as Ellie drove home, the air inside her car thick with heat. Neon signs flickered on along the strip of pawn shops and liquor stores. She slowed at one intersection, her breath catching in her throat. There, glowing beneath the pawn shop's harsh lights, sat her ring. Its diamond glittered under glass, reduced to a cheap price tag taped to the display. Her chest tightened, but she didn't pull over. She pressed her foot on the accelerator, the pawn shop's neon fading in her rearview mirror. The ring was gone, but the war it started was hers to win. The neon buzzed overhead as Ellie pulled her sedan into the pawnshop's cracked asphalt lot. Fluorescent tubes sputtered against the fading daylight, their glow a harsh halo over the barred windows. She shut off the engine, but didn't move, her hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather groaned beneath her fingers. Through the front window, she saw it, her diamond ring perched inside a glass case. It sparkled beneath the shop lights, but the little white tag dangling from its band made her stomach twist. $1,200, a number where her marriage, her dignity, her years had once lived. Ellie forced herself to open the car door, the desert heat rushing in, thick with the smell of tar and gasoline. Each step toward the shop felt deliberate, her heels clicking sharp against the pavement. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, a cheery sound that didn't match the grit inside. The clerk, a young man with tattoos snaking up his neck, leaned lazily against the counter. "Help you." His tone was indifferent, the kind of voice that had heard too many sob stories and stopped caring. Ellie pointed at the ring without hesitation. "That one. Where did you get it?" He shrugged. "Guy came in this morning, said it was his." Took cash and left. Her throat tightened. Tall, graying at the temples, maybe 45? The clerk smirked faintly, recognizing the look of someone who already knew the answer. "That's him, Brian Hart. You know him?" Ellie's nails pressed crescents into her palm. "I know him." The clerk tilted his head. "You want it back?" Price is on the tag for a moment. Her knees threatened to give way. She saw herself reaching for her wallet, desperate to reclaim what was hers. But then her husband's voice came to her, not as memory, but as presence. "Don't overpay for something you already earned." She straightened her shoulders. "No." The clerk blinked. "No." Ellie's lips tightened. "It's just glass now." "Not worth what it cost me." She turned on her heel, leaving the ring under its cheap tag and the clerk blinking after her. Outside, the night had deepened. Las Vegas neons spilling across the cracked sidewalk in blues and reds. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, her small frame hunched, her cheeks wet with quiet tears. When Ellie opened the door, the girl swiped at her face, pretending she hadn't been crying. "I saw it," Sophie whispered. "Did you get it back?" Ellie settled into the driver's seat, her expression calm, her voice flat as stone. "No, I don't want it back," Sophie's mouth trembled. "But it was Grandpa's." Ellie cut her off gently, resting a hand on the girl's knee. "And that's why it deserves more than to sit in a pawnshop window." "He gave me more than a ring, Sophie. He gave me a life. They can't pawn that." From the back seat, Trudy leaned forward, her perfume a mix of lavender and tobacco. "Don't reclaim," she said firmly. "Replace with revenge. That's how you win. Make the loss their undoing, not yours." Ellie started the car, her face illuminated briefly by the dashboard lights. "I intend to." They drove in silence through the neon-lit streets, past casinos humming with laughter, past pawn shops swallowing dreams one ticket at a time. The strip faded into residential quiet, the desert wind pressing dust against the windshield. Sophie stared out the window, her reflection fractured in the glass, while Ellie's mind worked steadily, each thought like a ledger entry balancing itself. By the time they pulled into the bank's underground lot, Ellie had decided. She slid her key into the deposit box drawer and pulled it open. Inside, nestled between crisp envelopes and ledgers, lay a folded deed, the title to the very house Brian and Monica believed was theirs. She lifted it carefully, the paper stiff with age, her name bold across the top. As neon from the street flickered faintly through the glass door of the vault, Ellie held the document close, her lips pressing into the ghost of a smile. The ring could stay behind glass. She had something stronger, paper that could strip the roof from above their heads. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Eleanor Hart smoothed the deed across her kitchen table, the document's edges curling slightly after years tucked away in her safe deposit box. Her name, Margaret Eleanor Hart, stood in bold type at the top, embossed seal still pressed faintly at the bottom corner. Her fingers brushed over the ink, remembering the day her husband slid the final mortgage payment across a bank desk. That was nearly 30 years ago. He'd smiled at her then, his shoulders lifting as though decades of labor had been lifted from him. "It's ours," he'd said, pressing the receipt into her hand. "Free and clear." Now, the words on the deed confirmed it. No liens, no co-owners, no banks, just her. Brian had begged once, years back, to add his name. "Just co-sign, Ma," he'd pleaded, shuffling, bills in his hands. "It'll look better if both of us are on it. For credit, for security." It's just paperwork she'd refused. Something in her had bristled at the eagerness in his voice. She'd said no, firmly, and held her ground through his sulking. Today, that decision gleamed brighter than any jewel. The house they all lived in, stucco walls, sun-baked roof, the same backyard roses she had planted decades earlier, still belonged to her. Brian and Monica were not owners. They weren't even tenants. They were guests, and guests could be shown the door. The next morning, Ellie carried the deed in a folder to Harvey Klein's office. The smell of stale coffee and legal pads greeted her, familiar after years of real estate closings. Harvey, tall and trim with reading glasses perched low on his nose, examined the document under a desk lamp. "Clean," he said finally, tapping the margin with his pen. "Your husband paid it off, and you never signed it away. You own this place outright." Brian and Monica. They're squatters in Sunday clothes. He looked up, his dry humor undercut with steel. "You want them gone? This is your hammer." Ellie's lips pressed together. "Hammer's no good without a nail," Harvey's mouth quirked. "Don't worry. They've given you nails enough that evening." Poker chips clattered across Trudy Myers's dining room table as Ellie explained what Harvey had said. Trudy leaned back, her cigarette glowing faintly in the dim kitchen light, her eyes sharp beneath her gray bangs. "They locked you out of love," Trudy said, voice low but firm. "So lock them out of walls. A ring sentimental, but a roof? That's survival. That's power. Use it." Ellie looked down at the deed again, the weight of it pressing into her lap. She nodded slowly. "I intend to." But as she slid the folder closed, her eye caught something odd, a second document tucked behind the deed. She pulled it free, her breath catching as she read. It was a line of credit agreement tied to her property, the header stamped from a local bank. Her name appeared at the bottom, scrawled in ink. But it wasn't her hand. The signature was jagged, uneven, her name written like an imitation of memory. Her stomach tightened. She flipped to the ledger page. "Withdrawals. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, bleeding out over the past year." Ellie stared at the forged signature, her pulse steady but fierce. The paper in her hand wasn't just theft. It was betrayal laid bare. The hum of Harvey Klein's desk lamp buzzed faintly as Ellie slid the suspicious document across the polished wood. The air in his office smelled of dust and toner, heavy with the faint bitterness of old coffee cooling in his mug. Harvey adjusted his glasses, leaning close, his eyes narrowing at the jagged scrawl at the bottom of the page. "That's not your signature," he said flatly, his finger tracing the uneven letters. "It's not even a good forgery. Whoever did this never studied how your hand curves." He flipped to the ledger, his pen tapping each line. "Withdrawals tied directly to a home equity line of credit. 10,000, 15, 3. Someone's been bleeding you out slowly." Ellie's chest rose sharply, but her hand stayed steady on the arms of her chair. "He stole a ring," she said, her voice low. "Now he's stealing a roof." "This ends now." Harvey met her gaze, dry humor gone, replaced by steel. "Good, because with proof, it won't be your ruin, it'll be his." He slid the paper into a clear sleeve, already labeling it for evidence. That evening, back at Trudy Myers's kitchen, the weight of the discovery spread across the table like another hand of cards. Poker chips sat forgotten as Ellie laid out photocopies Harvey had made. The withdrawals glared back in stark black ink, damning in their simplicity. Sophie perched on the edge of a chair, her eyes wide, her voice cracking. "Grandma, he's ruining everything. First your ring, now this. What's left?" Ellie reached across, pressing her palm over Sophie's trembling hand. Her grip was firm, anchoring. "Not everything, Sophie. He only ruins what I let him touch." Trudy exhaled smoke, the tip of her cigarette glowing faintly. "Document every withdrawal," she instructed, sliding a yellow notepad toward Ellie. "Dates, amounts, his signature against yours. Build the paper trail. Paper's what traps rats." Ellie picked up the pen without hesitation. Her handwriting scratched across the page, each number like a nail hammered into a coffin. The next morning, she walked into her own kitchen, the smell of bacon grease clinging faintly to the air. Brian sat at the table, still in yesterday's shirt, a pile of lottery tickets scattered before him. Monica, hair wrapped in a messy bun, scrolled through her phone, smirking occasionally at whatever she read. Ellie set her grocery bag on the counter with calm precision, but her eyes tracked the papers on the table. Receipts from the bank, withdrawals, proof of his hand in the theft. Brian leaned back in his chair, smirking at no one in particular. "You know," he said loudly, "once she's gone, this house is mine. Always was meant to be. She can play queen of the castle now, but when she slips..." He made a twisting motion with his hand, like turning a key in a lock. "It'll all be mine." Ellie's face gave nothing away. She lifted the bag, setting eggs gently into the fridge, her back to him. The clatter of his laugh bounced off the tile walls, cruel and careless. Her hands never shook, but in her chest, the vow hardened like stone. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Ellie turned it between her fingers as Harvey slid the new draft across his desk. The paper crisp, the ink fresh. Outside the office window, Las Vegas shimmered in desert heat, casino billboards flashing promises of jackpots. Inside, silence reigned. "Read every line," Harvey said, his dry voice steady. "But I think you'll like this version better than the last." Ellie adjusted her glasses and bent over the pages. Each clause was a blade, sharpened to cut out Brian and Monica completely. No inheritance, no residuals, not a dime, not a wall, not a rose bush from the backyard. Their names, once inscribed in earlier versions, had been erased like chalk washed off a board. Her estate, the house, the savings, the investments, was placed entirely in Sophie's name, to be held in trust until she turned 21. There was even a provision to help her with college tuition or trade school if she chose that path. And for backup, in case tragedy struck, Harvey had drafted a secondary beneficiary, the Nevada Senior Housing Nonprofit. "Smart," Harvey said, tapping the line with his pen. "If Brian or Monica try to fight this, they'd have to prove they're more deserving than a nonprofit dedicated to sheltering seniors. Judges don't look kindly on greedy heirs in that matchup." Ellie's lips pressed tight. "They can fight air." "Not paper," Harvey's dry smile flickered. "Then let's make it airtight." He added one last detail, sliding the clause into her view. "Any contesting heir will be automatically disinherited and excluded from all estate distribution. The no contest clause. A lock they couldn't pick." Ellie lifted the pen. Her hand was steady as she signed, each loop of her name a door closing behind her. When she finished, Harvey gathered the pages, slipped them into a binder, and tapped the cover once. "Done," he said. "Brian and Monica are ghosts on paper now." Ellie leaned back in her chair, exhaling through her nose. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt lighter. That evening, she carried a copy of the will to Trudy's kitchen. The smell of cardamom tea filled the air, the table cleared of poker chips for once. Sophie sat across from her grandmother, chewing her lip nervously as Trudy read through the new document. When she finished, Trudy let out a low whistle. Erased, like they never existed. She looked at Ellie, eyes sharp with approval. "That's colder than I'd have managed, and I admire it." Sophie's face softened with relief, though her voice trembled. "Grandma, it means I'm safe? That they can't take the house or the money anymore, Ellie reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's hand. It means the future belongs to you, not to gamblers, not to thieves. The girl's eyes brimmed, but she nodded, gripping Ellie's hand tightly. By the time Ellie drove home, the strip lights flickered on, neons swallowing the night sky. She parked in the driveway, the hum of cicadas thick in the warm air, and walked into her house with her shoulders straighter than before. Brian was sprawled across the couch, a half-empty beer sweating onto the coffee table. Monica sat beside him, scrolling her phone with one manicured finger. Neither of them looked up when Ellie passed through the living room, but their silence was watchful, waiting. Ellie said nothing. She didn't need to. The next morning, Brian stood in line at a gas station ATM, sweat beating down his neck in the rising desert heat. He slid his debit card in, punched his PIN, and waited. Declined. He frowned, tried again. Harder this time, jabbing the buttons like force could change the numbers. Declined. Machine's broken, he muttered, stepping to the side. Another customer tried and withdrew cash easily. Brian's throat tightened. He shoved his card in a third time. Declined. The ATM screen spat the same word again and again. Declined. Until Brian's fist pounded against the plastic casing. He leaned close, sweat dripping down his temples in the desert heat. His breath fogging the glass, as if intimidation could change the numbers inside the machine. The man waiting behind him sighed loudly. "Buddy, it's not the ATM. It's your account." Brian spun, eyes bloodshot. "Shut your mouth." He shoved his card in one more time, pressing the buttons with white-knuckled force. The screen blinked back its refusal like a taunt. He ripped the card out and stormed toward his car, curses spilling under his breath. By the time he barreled into the house, the afternoon sun had baked the stucco walls into ovens. The front door slammed against the frame so hard a picture rattled off its hook. Ellie looked up from the kitchen table, where she was calmly trimming dead leaves from a vase of roses. "You shut me down," Brian's voice cracked like a whip, veins straining in his neck. Ellie didn't flinch. She clipped another stem, the snip of the shears crisp in the charged silence. "Did you expect me to beg?" His hands curled into fists. "That was my money." Ellie set the scissors down, her eyes meeting his with a cold steadiness. "No, it was mine. Always was." From the doorway, Monica appeared, her arms folded, her nails gleaming sharp under the light. She smirked, her voice dripping venom. "Careful, Eleanor. Keep acting high and mighty, and we'll put you in a home. Somewhere with locks you can't control." Sophie, who had been lingering in the hall, clutched her phone tighter. Her heart raced, but her fingers moved quickly, sliding the camera app open. She raised it just enough to record, her breath shallow, capturing every word. Brian's shouting filled the house, the smell of sweat and stale beer clinging to his clothes. He slammed his palm against the refrigerator door, making Sophie jump. "You think you can just cut me off? After everything I've done?" Ellie rose from her chair slowly, her movements deliberate, as though every second she took to stand made her more unshakable. "Yes," she said, her voice level. "I can." And I did. The stillness that followed was louder than his rage. Later, in Trudy Myers's kitchen, the old friend leaned close as Sophie showed her the video on the phone. The recording played back Brian's fury, Monica's sneer, Ellie's calm reply. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, the tension thick even in replay. Trudy's cigarette hung from her lips as she exhaled slowly, watching the footage end. "Good girl," she whispered to Sophie, her voice raspy but proud. "Keep recording. Evidence is worth more than diamonds." Sophie nodded, clutching the phone to her chest. "I don't want him to hurt her again." Ellie placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "He won't. Not the way he wants to." But across town, Brian sat hunched at a bar, a half-empty whiskey sweating in his grip. His debit card lay useless on the counter, the bartender eyeing it with disdain. His pride burned hotter than the alcohol sliding down his throat. He muttered to Monica, who perched beside him with narrowed eyes and an impatient scowl. "She's slipping," Brian said, slurring the word just enough. "She's old, confused, forgetful. I'll file for guardianship. Say she can't handle her own affairs. If the court believes me, I get control of everything. Accounts, house, all of it." Monica's lips curved into a slow, cruel smile. "Do it. Make it legal." The bartender cleared his throat loudly, uninterested in their scheme, but the words were already out in the world. The plan sealed between them. And as the neon bar lights flickered, Brian pulled out his phone, searching for the forms. By morning, the paperwork was filed. He wasn't just stealing anymore. He was declaring war. The courtroom buzzed with low chatter, the smell of polished wood and stale paper thick in the air. Brian sat smugly at one table, suit jacket wrinkled, his knee bouncing with forced confidence. Monica whispered something in his ear, her lipstick-stained smile sharp as a blade. Across from them, Ellie sat upright, hands folded calmly on the polished oak, her expression unreadable. The bailiff called the session to order, and the judge entered with a sweep of robes. His voice carried across the chamber. "This hearing addresses the guardianship petition filed by Mr. Brian Hart against Mrs. Eleanor Hart. We will begin with the court-ordered evaluation." Ellie followed the doctor into the witness stand, the hush of the crowd pressing in. The man adjusted his glasses, clipboard in hand. His tone was professional, but curiosity glimmered in his eyes. "Mrs. Hart, I'll be asking a series of questions to assess your cognitive capacity. Please answer as best you can." Ellie inclined her head. "I always do." The questions began. Dates, times, current events. She answered without pause, her memory sharp as a tack. He asked her to calculate sums in her head. She rattled them off faster than he could write. He asked about her finances. She recited her accounts, balances, and the date she'd closed the joint account Brian had siphoned. Finally, he tested her recall. "Mrs. Hart, can you name 3 objects I'll list for you?" "Apple, clock, candle. I'll return to them later." Minutes passed. When he circled back, Ellie met his gaze, voice steady. "Apple, clock, candle. And your pen is running out of ink." A chuckle rippled through the gallery. Even the judge's stern mouth twitched. The doctor set his clipboard down, visibly impressed. "Mrs. Hart, you're sharper than most 60-year-olds I've evaluated. Your capacity is unquestionable." Brian shifted in his chair, color rising up his neck. "She's rehearsed. She's hiding things. She forgets all the time." His words tumbled over one another, desperate and brittle. The judge's gavel cracked once. "Enough." His eyes cut to Brian. "Why file false claims against your mother?" Brian stammered, hands gesturing wildly. She's confused. She doesn't know what's happening with the accounts. Sophie rose from the gallery, voice trembling but strong. "She knows exactly what's happening. He stole her diamond ring while she slept, and he bragged about it." The room went still. Every head turned. Sophie's eyes brimmed with both shame and courage, her voice cutting through the silence. "I saw him take it. And I saw him pawn it." Brian slammed his palms against the table. "Lies! She's a child." But the judge leaned forward, his expression darkening. "The only lies I see are in your petition, Mr. Hart." His gavel struck again, sharp and final. "This court finds Mrs. Hart fully competent. Furthermore, given the evidence presented, I am ordering an immediate investigation into Mr. Hart for fraud." The words landed like stones. Brian's smirk vanished, his mouth falling open. Monica's hand slipped from his arm, her eyes flickering with sudden doubt. Ellie exhaled slowly, her composure unbroken. She had not needed to shout. Truth had spoken for her, through precision, through calm, through Sophie's brave voice. And now the law itself had turned its eyes on Brian. The courtroom felt hotter than the desert sun outside, though the air conditioner hummed faintly overhead. Brian sat at his table, jaw tight, eyes darting between the bailiff and the stack of papers in Harvey Klein's hands. Monica, beside him, smoothed her skirt nervously, her manicured nails tapping the table in quick succession. Harvey rose with deliberate calm, the weight of decades in real estate law evident in every step. He adjusted his glasses, holding the documents like a dealer holding the winning hand. Your Honor, what we have here is not simply mismanagement or misunderstanding. It is fraud. He held up the first sheet. This is a home equity line of credit drawn against Mrs. Hart's property. The signature at the bottom is meant to be hers. He crossed the room, placed the page before the judge, and slid another beside it. And this, Mrs. Hart's actual signature. The difference speaks for itself. The judge leaned forward, his expression darkening. He lifted both papers, comparing them in silence. The room held its breath. Harvey pressed on, his tone cutting. The withdrawals tied to this line of credit total over $40,000. Every check, every electronic transfer, leads directly to Mr. Hart's accounts. He pivoted sharply, his gaze pinning Brian. Not a single transaction was authorized by his mother. A murmur swept through the gallery. Brian's face flushed crimson. Those weren't me. She must have. Harvey silenced him with a raised eyebrow, already flipping to the next exhibit. And yet the receipts show otherwise. Luxury boutique charges, jewelry purchases, cash advances. Many signed by his wife, Monica Hart. Monica's head snapped up, her face paling under the courtroom lights. I didn't know it was stolen money. Harvey's dry chuckle cut her off. Ignorance isn't a defense when you're walking out of stores with bags full of clothes bought with equity stolen from your mother-in-law's home. He let the words hang in the air, heavy as a gavel. Ellie sat silently at her table, hands folded neatly in her lap, her composure unbroken. Not once did she speak. Not once did her lips twitch into a smile. The strength of her presence was in her stillness, the calm eye of a storm that had shifted onto Brian and Monica. From the gallery, Trudy leaned forward, the corner of her mouth curling into a cold, satisfied smile. Her cigarette was long gone, but her eyes glittered with the same smoky sharpness. She had warned Ellie that paper would be the weapon, and now it was slicing clean. The judge slammed his gavel once, the sharp crack echoing. Enough! This is egregious, to exploit a parent through forgery and fraud. His glare landed on Brian, then on Monica. Is contemptible, and criminal Brian stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of authority. She doesn't need the money. She doesn't even know what to do with it. Ellie finally turned her head, her eyes locking on him with a steadiness that made him falter mid-sentence. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence condemned him more than words ever could. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled, his face carved from stone. Given the overwhelming evidence, this court orders the immediate freezing of all equity tied to Mrs. Hart's property. Effective today, full and exclusive control of the home reverts to Mrs. Hart. Mr. Hart and Mrs. Monica Hart are prohibited from further accessing any lines of credit tied to the property. The words fell heavy, final, like a lock clicking shut. Brian slumped in his chair, his mouth open but empty of defense. Monica's hand slid away from his, her eyes darting nervously toward the gallery as whispers rose around them. Ellie remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the deed in Harvey's binder. The house was hers again, not just in memory, not just in law, but in power. The ink from the judge's order was barely dry when Ellie made her next move. She didn't celebrate, didn't linger. That night, while the desert air still shimmered with heat and the cicadas sang in the mesquite trees, she sat at her dining room table with her old leather-bound planner open. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Marta," she said, when the voice answered, smooth and familiar. "I need a listing. Fast. Cash only. Confidential." Her former colleague didn't hesitate. "What's the address?" Ellie gave it, her tone clipped. "It's still mine, free and clear. But I don't want it tomorrow. I want it tonight. Within an hour, Marta arrived with her laptop, a camera, and the kind of energy only Vegas real estate could demand. The smell of coffee lingered in the air as they staged just enough photos, cropping out clutter, avoiding the evidence of Brian's half-crushed beer cans. Marta tapped her screen, excitement bubbling. Cash buyer network. Investors who don't blink at fast flips. I'll have offers before midnight. Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line. Good, Noir, I'm not keeping this house as a battlefield. It's a weapon, and I'm done letting it wound me. By midnight, the offers poured in, emails lighting up Marta's phone like slot machines. Ellie reviewed them one by one, her sharp eyes catching every clause, every loophole. Finally, she pointed to one. That one. No contingencies. Cash in hand. Close in 24, Marta's brows lifted. You're not playing small, are you? I stopped playing when they took my ring. By sunrise, the paperwork was signed, notarized, and stamped. The house, the very roof Brian had claimed would be his, belonged to someone else. Ellie had sold it from underneath him without a whisper of warning. When Brian finally stumbled out of bed, the desert sun was already cutting across the yard. His eyes caught something foreign through the blinds, a sharp rectangle of white planted in the lawn, bold red letters screaming, "For sale!" He rushed outside, bare feet slapping against the concrete. Monica followed, her robe hanging loose, mascara smudged from last night's sulk. They stood in the yard, blinking against the glare, as if the sign were a mirage. "You can't," Monica shrieked, her voice slicing the quiet suburban street. "This is our house." Ellie stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, her hair neat, her eyes unflinching. She looked at them as if they were strangers trespassing. "It was mine," she said evenly, "and I already sold it." Brian's jaw dropped. "You... what? To who? When?" "This morning, before you even brushed your teeth." She sipped her coffee, letting the silence stretch, neighbors peeking from windows drawn by the commotion. Monica's voice cracked, high and shrill. "You can't just throw us out." Ellie's gaze flicked to the sign, then back to them. "I don't need to throw you out. The law will do it for me." At that exact moment, a white sheriff's SUV rolled to a stop at the curb, gravel crunching under its tires. The officer stepped out, papers in hand, his expression all business. The sound of his boots against the pavement was heavy, deliberate. Brian paled. "What is this?" The sheriff unfolded the notice, his voice carrying across the yard. "By order of the court, Mr. and Mrs. Hart, you are hereby served with notice of eviction. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." The paper slapped against Brian's chest, fluttering in the hot wind. His hands trembled as he caught them, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Ellie turned, walking back into the house without another word, the screen door creaking shut behind her. The sound of Brian shouting followed her, but she didn't stop. For the first time in years, the house echoed with something other than his threats. It echoed with her victory. The sun beat down on the stucco neighborhood, its glare bouncing off windshields and blinding anyone who dared linger too long outside. But today, no one looked away. Curtains parted, blinds tilted. Neighbors peered through narrow slits to watch the spectacle unfold. Two movers in gray uniforms trudged back and forth, lugging box after box from Ellie's house to the curb. The thud of cardboard on concrete punctuated the silence of the street. A sofa, a flat screen, clothes stuffed into trash bags. Each piece dumped unceremoniously into a growing pile. Brian paced the driveway like a caged animal, sweat slicking his temples. His fists clenched, his face red, his words aimed at anyone who'd listen. "This is illegal! She can't do this! This is my house!" The sheriff stood cool and steady at the curb, aviator glasses hiding his eyes. His hand rested casually on his belt as he replied, voice firm and unyielding. "Not anymore. Property doesn't belong to you. You were served. You had your 72 hours. "They're up," Monica shrieked as another box hit the pile, this one spilling open to reveal high heels and handbags, their glossy surfaces dulled by the dust. She scrambled to stuff them back, her manicured nails flashing in the sun. "Stop! Be careful with those!" Her voice cracked, but the movers didn't pause. They were paid to haul, not soothe. From the porch, Ellie watched it all with an expression of carved granite. She stood straight-backed, Sophie at her side. The girl's hand slipped into her grandmother's, her grip tight, her chin lifted as if drawing strength from Ellie's stillness. Brian's fury finally spun toward them. He pointed a trembling finger, voice breaking into a roar. "You ruined me. You ruined everything." Ellie met his glare, her voice calm, almost gentle. "No, Brian. You pawned yourself." The words struck harder than any shout. A murmur rippled through the neighbors gathered behind curtains and cracked doors. They weren't just watching a family fight. They were witnessing judgment. The sheriff stepped closer, his boots crunching on gravel. He held the eviction order high enough for the crowd to glimpse. "Property's not yours anymore. It hasn't been for days. Accept it and move on." His tone left no room for argument. Brian's shoulders sagged. His voice lost its venom, replaced with a hollow echo. "Where are we supposed to go?" Ellie didn't answer. She didn't need to. That was no longer her burden. The movers carried the last box out, an old poker set Brian had stolen from the garage years ago, still reeking faintly of stale smoke. They dropped it on the heap. The slam of the front door as they exited was final, like the closing of a vault. Ellie turned to Sophie, her eyes softening only for her granddaughter. She slipped a folder from her handbag, its edges worn but its contents pristine. She pressed it into Sophie's hands. The girl blinked, startled. "What's this?" Ellie's voice was quiet but firm, carrying more weight than the shouting ever could. "Your future." The folder in Sophie's hands still felt warm from Ellie's grip. She carried it into Harvey Klein's office the next morning, her grandmother beside her, the air heavy with the faint tang of copier toner and strong coffee. The walls were lined with neat shelves of binders, everyone labeled with years and case names, silent proof that paper had power. Harvey adjusted his tie as he spread the documents across the table. "Here's how it works," he said, his voice clipped and efficient. "The trust is finalized today. The proceeds from the house sale are split. Half into a college fund for Sophie, half to the Nevada Senior Housing Nonprofit. Everything notarized. Everything locked down." Ellie leaned forward, her eyes sharp on the inked lines. She read each page slowly, lips pressed tight. This wasn't just business, it was the transformation of betrayal into legacy. Sophie watched, wide-eyed. "College fund? For me?" Ellie's gaze softened, her hand brushing the girl's knuckles. "Yes. So no matter what happens, you'll never beg for opportunity. Not from your parents, not from me, not from anyone." Sophie's throat bobbed, emotion brimming. "You saved me." Ellie shook her head. "No, Sophie. I built for you, Trudy," perched in the corner with her ever-present cigarette tucked behind her ear, leaned forward and gave Ellie's hand a firm pat. "Ironclad," she said, her raspy voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had seen too many loopholes exploited. "Not even a rat with a lawyer can chew through this one." Harvey lifted his notary stamp and pressed it onto the final page. The crisp thunk, sealing the deal. "Done," he announced. "From this moment on, they can howl all they like, but they won't touch a dime." The stamp's ink still glistened when Ellie leaned back in her chair. Relief didn't flood her. She didn't allow herself that luxury. But there was a steady warmth in her chest, a confirmation that her late husband's hard work, her years of careful planning, would not be squandered by greed. They left the office together, stepping into the dry Las Vegas air. Heat shimmered off the pavement, carrying the faint smell of gasoline from the nearby lot. Sophie clutched the notarized copy of her trust, as if it were a lifeline, her steps lighter than they had been in months. That evening, back at Trudy's house, the women gathered around the kitchen table with mugs of tea. The poker chips had been swept away, replaced with quiet satisfaction. Trudy raised her cup in a mock toast. To the girl who won't repeat her parents' mistakes. Sophie blushed, her eyes dropping, but Ellie's hand found her shoulder. To the girl who will build better. The clink of porcelain against porcelain echoed softly, more powerful than any shuffle of cards. For the first time in weeks, Ellie allowed herself a small smile. She had shifted the ground beneath Brian's feet so thoroughly he would never find his balance again. He had stolen while she slept, and she had answered by building while fully awake. But across town, under the suffocating neon glow of a casino, Brian stumbled through glass doors, pockets nearly empty. The clatter of slot machines filled the air, punctuated by the cheers of winners and the hollow silence of losers. His last crumpled bills slid across the counter to a pawn clerk, Monica's jewelry piled on the scale. The pawn clerk didn't even look impressed when Brian dropped Monica's velvet jewelry box onto the glass counter. The lid flipped back to reveal gold bracelets, dangling earrings, and a necklace she wore only on casino nights. The fluorescent lights above bleached them pale, draining away whatever glamour they had. $2,000, the clerk said flatly. Brian's jaw tightened. That's worth 10. Not tonight it isn't. He snatched the bills, crumpling them in his fist as though squeezing them hard could make more appear. When he pushed through the revolving doors of the casino minutes later, the desert air clung to him, sweat already slicking his temples. Neon lights buzzed overhead, promising fortunes, but his stomach churned with hunger and whiskey. Inside, the slot machines roared like a choir, bells chiming, coins clattering, the stink of cigarettes and desperation clinging to the carpet. Brian shoved chips onto the blackjack table, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. Deal! Hand after hand, his pile shrank. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. He muttered under his breath, cursing the cards, the dealer, the world. Hit me, he barked, slamming his palm down. Bust. Again. By midnight, his last chip clattered onto the felt. His wedding band already stripped from his finger and traded for credit at the desk. He stared down at the empty space on his hand, as if it mocked him. Sir, the pit boss said, stepping closer, his tone edged with disdain. Maybe it's time you walked away. But Brian didn't walk. He stumbled, shoulders sagging, out the casino doors into the night. The next day, the humiliation spread. A patron had recorded footage on their phone. Brian Hart, red-faced and shouting at the dealer, pawning off jewelry for chips. The video leaked online, circulating through local forums, and eventually to news outlets that thrived on Vegas ruin. The headline was brutal. Man gambles family's future after defrauding mother. Ellie's phone rang off the hook. Reporters hungry for comment. She let it ring, the shrill sound filling her kitchen until Sophie finally silenced it. Ellie returned to her pruning shears, snipping dead leaves from her roses without a glance at the phone. He's calling you too, Sophie said, holding up her own buzzing screen. Ellie didn't look. And I'm not answering. Monica, however, had answered. The footage burned through whatever patience she had left. That evening, she packed her designer bags, what hadn't already been pawned, and walked out, her heels clicking on the pavement. Her voice lingered in the doorway like poison. You're pathetic, Brian. Absolutely pathetic. Brian trailed after her, begging, but she didn't turn back. The sound of her car engine faded into the night, leaving only his ragged sobs in the driveway. Across town, Trudy clicked through the news article on her tablet, her glasses sliding down her nose. He's finished, she said, shaking her head. He's not just broke, he's bankrupt in reputation too. No one crawls back from that. Sophie leaned against the counter, her arms folded. He chose this. He chose every card, every lie, every bet. Her voice was steady now, no longer the timid whisper it had been weeks ago. Ellie set her pruning shears down, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression was calm, almost detached. Yes, he chose, that night, as the desert cooled and the cicadas quieted. A heavy knock rattled Ellie's front door. The sound was desperate, fists pounding wood in a rhythm that reeked of panic. The pounding rattled the door frame, each blow a frantic echo through the quiet house. The desert night outside was cool, the cicadas humming faintly, but Brian's voice broke through it like glass. "Mom, please, open up." "I'm sorry," his words cracked, carried more by desperation than sincerity. Inside, Ellie stood a few feet from the door, the hallway light painting, her in pale yellow. Sophie hovered near the staircase, phone clutched in her hand, eyes wide. The girl had seen her father angry, cruel, reckless, but never broken. Now he was all three and something else, hollow. The pounding grew weaker, replaced by sobs. Brian slid down against the door until his voice came muffled, closer to the floor. "I lost everything. Monica's gone, the money's gone. I just need a place to start over. Please, Mom. Just let me in." Ellie didn't move. Her face was unreadable, her breath even, as if she had prepared for this moment all her life. Sophie took a tentative step closer. "Grandma," she whispered. Ellie raised a hand, silencing her gently. Her gaze never left the door. The sobbing turned into pleading, each word heavier than the last. "I'll change. I swear, I was stupid. I took things I shouldn't have. Just let me in, Mom. I'll make it right. Don't leave me out here." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of his knuckles brushing against the wood. A soft rhythm now, almost a child's knock. Finally, Ellie stepped forward. She placed her palm flat against the cool surface of the door, feeling the vibration of his pleas through the wood. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her lips pressed thin, then spoke, her voice steady, cold as stone. "You locked me out first." The words hung in the air, sharp as any blade. Sophie's breath caught, her eyes darting from her grandmother to the door. On the other side, Brian went quiet. For a moment, it seemed he hadn't heard. Then a muffled whimper rose, fragile and thin. "Don't do this to me." Ellie's fingers curled into a fist against the door, then released. She stepped back, grasped the knob, not to open, but to push. The door shut tight with a click, gentle but unyielding. The lock turned. Outside, Brian's weight slumped against the wood. He didn't shout, he didn't pound. He just sat there, shoulders shaking, the night swallowing his sobs. Inside, Ellie exhaled. Her back straightened. She turned to Sophie, whose face was pale but brimming with understanding. "Some locks," Ellie said softly. "Stay turned." Sophie nodded slowly, clutching her phone to her chest. The truth of it sinking in, they walked together into the living room. The lamp cast a warm glow across the walls, chasing away the shadow of Brian's voice. For the first time in months, the house felt whole again. Not because of what was inside, but because of what was kept out. The next morning, the story broke. A neighbor's video of the eviction and Brian's desperate pleas at the door had made its way to a local paper. The headline was impossible to miss. "Widow outsmarts son after ring theft." The print edition landed on Ellie's doorstep with a soft thud. The ink fresh, the photo grainy but clear. There she was, Ellie Hart, standing firm on her porch while her son shouted in the yard, the caption beneath branding her not as a victim, but as a victor. Ellie picked up the paper, unfolded it, and let the words sink in. Ellie sipped her coffee, the bitter scent mingling with the ink of the paper. Sophie hovered nearby, practically glowing. "Grandma, you're a hero," the girl's voice wavered with pride, her eyes shining as she traced the headline with her fingertip. "Everyone's talking about you." Ellie chuckled low, shaking her head. "Heroes wear capes. I just wore patience." By mid-morning, the phone rang again. Not a reporter this time, but the director of the local senior center. The woman's tone was warm, tinged with awe. "Mrs. Hart, we'd be honored if you'd speak at our next event. Seniors need to hear how you fought back. You could give them hope. Ellie glanced at her roses blooming outside the window, the morning sun gilding their petals. For years she had kept her battles private, endured quietly. Now the story was out in the open, carried on newsprint and whispered in neighborhoods. She felt the weight of that invitation and found it surprisingly light. "I'll be there," she said. That evening, Trudy arrived with a bakery box in her hands, the sweet smell of sugar wafting through the kitchen before she even set it down. She flipped the lid open with a flourish. "To justice," she declared, revealing a frosted cake scrawled with the words, "Better than payback." Sophie laughed, clapping her hands. "That's perfect." Ellie shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Leave it to you, Trudy, to find sugar and smoke." Trudy sliced generous pieces, the knife scraping against cardboard, the scent of vanilla filling the room. They ate around the table, laughter punctuating bites, the heavy shadows of courtrooms and pawn shops replaced with something lighter, almost sweet. When Harvey arrived later, his dry humor intact, he raised his paper plate like a toast. "To airtight paperwork," he said, chewing around the words. "The unsung hero of every war." Ellie laughed, the sound freer than it had been in months. "Better than diamonds," she replied, her fork tapping lightly against her plate. For a moment, the kitchen was filled with the ordinary joy of friends, the sound of Sophie's giggle blending with Trudy's raspy laugh, Harvey's low chuckle, and Ellie's steady warmth. It wasn't flashy like the casinos or loud like the pawn shops, but it was richer, more enduring. Later, when the dishes were washed and the cake reduced to crumbs, Sophie slipped out of the room. Ellie assumed the girl was heading to bed, but she returned a few minutes later, holding something small in both hands. "Grandma," Sophie said softly, her tone serious in a way that made everyone pause. "I got you something." She stepped closer and placed a small box on the table. Dark velvet, tied with a thin ribbon. Ellie frowned slightly, her heart tightening. Her fingers brushed the lid, the texture soft beneath her touch. She looked at Sophie, whose eyes brimmed with both excitement and nervousness. "What's this?" Ellie asked, though part of her already guessed. Sophie only smiled, lips pressed together as if holding in a secret. "Open it!" The room fell silent, anticipation humming in the air. The faint tick of the wall clock filled the gap, each second stretching long. Ellie's fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon, lifting the lid. The velvet box sat on the table, small enough to vanish in a palm, yet heavy with meaning. Ellie hesitated, her thumb resting on the edge, the ribbon untied and limp like a fallen thread. Around her the kitchen had gone still, Trudy leaning forward with her cigarette forgotten behind her ear. Harvey polishing his glasses, though he wasn't really looking at them. Sophie watching with wide, earnest eyes. Ellie lifted the lid. Inside, cushioned by dark velvet, was a diamond pendant. Modest, not the kind that would tempt a pawnshop's neon hunger, but dazzling in the soft kitchen light. The facets caught every flicker of the overhead bulb, scattering stars across the table. Her breath caught, but it wasn't the stone that undid her. It was the engraving on the silver backing, delicate letters etched deep, "To the woman who never begged." Ellie's throat tightened. Her hand trembled as she touched the cool metal, the diamond warm where it had rested against the velvet. Tears pricked her eyes, not from weakness, but from the sharpness of recognition. The world had tried to strip her of dignity, of legacy, of the quiet authority she had built. Yet here it was, reflected back in a gift from the granddaughter who had seen it all. Sophie's voice wavered, but her smile was steady. "I couldn't replace what they stole. But I wanted you to have something new. Something that's just yours." Ellie blinked hard, one tear escaping down her cheek. She caught it with her fingertip and laughed softly, the sound trembling. "Oh, Sophie," her voice was thick, husky. "This is more than new." "It's forever," Trudy cleared her throat gruffly, though her eyes glistened too. "That's priceless," she muttered, her tone brusque as ever, though her lips tugged upward. "Doesn't matter what some pawn shop." Window says Harvey leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with a dry smile. Ironclad, he said. Just like your story. No loopholes. No cracks. Ellie fastened the pendant around her neck, the chain cool against her skin, the diamond settling just above her heart. She lifted her chin, feeling the weight not as a burden, but as a seal. A final chapter closing. They sold my ring while I slept, she said softly, her eyes fixed on the pendant. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping across Sophie, Trudy, and Harvey, her voice gaining strength with each word. But I sold their roof before sunrise. Sophie laughed through her tears, leaning into Ellie's shoulder. The girl smelled faintly of vanilla shampoo, her hair warm from the kitchen heat. Ellie wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, the pendant catching the light as though it were nodding in agreement. For the first time in months, Ellie felt no shadows lurking at her door, no threat of keys turning against her, no hollow echo of loss, only peace. She reached for her coffee cup, the steam still rising, and let herself savor it. The quiet clink of porcelain, the faint sweetness of sugar in the air, the warmth of Sophie's head against her shoulder. Out on the street, the world moved on. Cars hummed down the asphalt. Neighbors watered their lawns. The sun dipped lower across the Nevada desert. But inside that kitchen, the moment was suspended, polished like the diamond around her neck. Ellie leaned back, her voice steady now, her smile sharp and certain. And I never lost a single night of sleep again.